Boomer in Recovery.
You're listening to Boomer in Recovery, the podcast about mental health and addiction recovery from a boomer's perspective. And here is your host, Cecil.
You know, when most people picture recovery, they picture young people, 20 years old, 30 years old, maybe even 40. But not many people talk about what recovery looks like after 50 or 60 or even 70. And maybe that's because a lot of us grew up believing that by this age, we're supposed to have life figured out, supposed to have the answers, supposed to be the ones giving advice instead of asking for help. But life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes addiction follows us into the middle age. Sometimes mental health struggles show up after retirement. And sometimes the coping skills that got us through the 30 years of work and responsibility stop working. And suddenly we're facing problems we never expected to face at this stage of life. Today, I want to talk about recovery after 50. The challenges nobody warned us about, the opportunity nobody talks about, and why it's never too late to build a better life. I think one of the hardest things for people our age is the surprise that we're still struggling. There's this idea that maturity solves everything, that wisdom automatically fixes pain, and that age somehow eliminates depression, anxiety, loneliness, or addiction. But that's not how us human beings, that's not how we work. Pain doesn't care how old you are, neither does grief, trauma, or addiction. I've met people who battled addiction in their 20s, and I've met people who didn't even develop serious problems until their 50s. Life has a way of humbling us all eventually. And I think sometimes that realization carries its own shame. How am I still dealing with this? Shouldn't I know better by now? Shouldn't I be past this? Maybe you've had thoughts like that. I know a lot of people have. I know I have. But struggling at 60 doesn't mean you failed at life. It means you're human. Here's something people don't prepare you for. Retirement, it changes things. Kids move away, careers end, and routines, they disappear. For decades, our schedules were built for us. Wake up, go to work, solve problems, come home, do it again tomorrow. Then one day, that structure, it disappears. And sometimes what disappears with it is our purpose. I've seen people who work 60-hour weeks suddenly sitting in a quiet house wondering, now what? That can be dangerous. Because boredom and isolation have always been close friends of addiction. So have loneliness and depression. The mind likes purpose. Human beings need purpose. And recovery after 50 often becomes less about stopping something and more about finding something worth moving towards. I think this one especially hits our generation. The just-in-case mindset. Work harder, save more, prepare for disaster. Don't become a burden. A lot of us grew up hearing stories from our parents who survived hard times. Economic uncertainty, layoffs, financial fear. Those lessons, they stayed with us, sometimes for decades. Even when the bills are paid, even when retirement is secure, that voice, it still whispers. What if something happens? What if I need more? What if you're not safe? For some people, that turns into overworking. And for others, it turns into anxiety. For some, it becomes a constant inability to relax. And that's worth talking about. Because peace and safety are not always the same thing. This may be the hardest section of all. The older we get, the more people we lose. Parents, friends, co-workers, neighbors, and sometimes even our spouse. Grief becomes more common. And unfortunately, our generation wasn't always taught how to grieve. We were taught to stay busy, stay strong, push through. But grief has a way of demanding attention eventually. And when grief goes unaddressed, people often look for ways to numb it. Hell, I've seen it happen. You've probably seen it happen too. Which is why learning healthy ways to process loss may be one of the most important recovery skills that we develop. Now let's talk about the good news, because there is good news. Recovery after 50 comes with something younger people don't have: perspective. We've lived enough life to know that bad seasons end. We survived enough storms to know that difficult moments pass. And we've made enough mistakes to know that mistakes don't define us forever. That's wisdom, real wisdom. Not the kind you get from books, it's the kind you earn. And that perspective can become one of our greatest strengths in recovery. This might be the most important thing I say today. It's not too late. Not too late to repair relationships, not too late to get healthy, and not too late to ask for help. I think some people quietly believe there comes a point where change isn't worth it anymore, where they are simply too old, too far gone, or too set in their ways. I don't believe that. I've seen too many people prove otherwise. I've seen people rebuild their lives in their 50s, their 60s, and even their 70s. Progress may look different than it did at 25, but progress is still possible. So what are the challenges nobody prepared us for? The surprise of still struggling, the loss of structure, and the just-in-case mindset. Grief, loneliness, purpose. But nobody prepared us for something else either. Hope, growth, second chances. Because one of the beautiful things about recovery is this: as long as we're breathing, our story isn't finished. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and remember, it's never too late to build a life you don't need to escape from. We'll talk again soon.